So I think we are recording. So, hello everyone. This is Jason. I'm the Hellenic Goof, and this is the Hellenic Goof podcast. And today, or tonight, whatever your time zone is, tonight we have a great guest once again. But this time around, it's a little bit more special, closer to my heart for two reasons. Basically, the guest today is a small part of he's a Greek, so he's a Hellene. At least genetically, a little bit, and that little bit for us Hellenes matters, I guess. So that's great. And the second one is he's very aware of nutrition facts. Are you a nutritionist, Chris?
I think of a nutritionist as someone who tells people what to eat, and I think of myself as a nutrition scientist, where I am much more oriented towards understanding the mechanisms of what happens when you eat food and what that does to your body.
All right, that seems much more respectable as a title and as an occupation. So,
nutrition science is really where biochemistry, molecular, and cellular biology meet the food that you eat. In the same way that pharmacology might be doing the same thing with drugs, or even like vaccinology might be doing the same thing with vaccines. It's all about the food is the context, and what you're studying is all the underlying mechanics of the human body.
I think you meant juiceology, not
juiceology.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Now, in case that
we can bleep that out.
No. I will let the boats try to find a reason to get this down. So anyways, friends, by the way, I'm Jason. I just changed my name, and I'm going to tell you about it shortly, because I used to be named Constantine. I don't know if you know the name.
I noticed that you had given me three names across, but
so my name now is Jason. My name used to be Kostas or Constantine. It's basically Kostas is the abbreviation of Constantine. And
I didn't even know that.
That's great. Probably.
I saw Kostas somewhere in here, and I saw Konstantinos on the your email name.
Yes,
and I saw you said I'm Jason. I'm like, all right, which of the three?
What is this guy? Yeah, I basically changed my name. So, and I'm going to say why I changed it shortly, so that you know, since you are into Greek, at least you were for a little while. So Jason in Greek is Iasonas, so it's the myth of Iasonas, and Iasonas comes from Iason. Basically, it's a name, Iason. And Iason comes from Iasis, and Iasis means healing in ancient Greek.
All right.
So Iasonas, Iason is the healer.
Cool.
I chose, yeah. It's cool to know where names come from. I mean, yeah.
Awesome. That's a big deal to change your name. How do your parents feel about that?
My father is excited because he always wanted me to change my name into some ancient.
Oh, really?
Greek. Yeah.
So your mom named you, huh?
Yeah, it was my mom's father. My grandfather is named.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
But my grandfather still lives. He's 94. But hey, I have to change my name, and if he still lives until he's like 120. I mean, what? At some point, I have to change. Yeah.
When I was looking through my family tree, and the pattern is basically all the men were like named after their grandfather, and took the middle name of their father.
So they had three names?
No. Everyone had the last name that came from their paternal line, but their first name, generally I think it was the first son was named after the grandfather in each clan. And so sometimes there's like cousins where the first boy in the group all have the same name, because they were all the first son that was named after their grandfather. But all those males take for their middle name the name of their father, right? So like all my uncles who are males on my mom's side all have the middle name Raphael, because that was my grandfather's name. My oldest uncle was named John because my grandfather's father, his grandfather, was John. So
I don't know. What do you feel about this custom? Before we go into the ancient stuff, because for anybody listening, I invited John here, Chris. You just confused me with all the names.
I get called John a lot on the internet because
really?
I mean every few months I get an email from someone who says John because of the Masterjohn. So because my last name is Masterjohn, they get confused.
Yeah, exactly.
My last name has a first name in it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I don't know. There's a story too. By the way, what do you feel about names and the spiritual lessons? Is there anything that you care about them?
Not really. I mean, I look at this custom more out of curiosity. You know, like this particular custom obviously says something about the authority of the men through the lineage. I think it's interesting that my name is Christopher and know a little bit about where it came from. I guess I would attach some significance to that, but I have no ambitions to sort of figure out my ideal identity and change my name to match it or anything like that. And I don't have kids, so I have no idea. Like, I'm sure I'll think a lot more about if I have kids, and when I have kids, I'm sure I'll think a lot more about what the significance of the name is when I'm naming them. But it's not something I think too much about right now.
Well, yeah, there are many reasons not to think right now about these things. So yeah, so that's
just to clarify that tradition, I guess, is the tradition on the island of Nisiros, where my great grandfather emigrated from, which is next to Kos. And my last name Mastroyanis, it was changed to Masterjohn at Ellis Island. And then my grandfather changed it to Masterjohn because there was an error in his birth certificate that he discovered when he got married that made it Masterjohn. And he was like, why don't I just flip these two letters around? So actually the name Masterjohn is exclusively from my grandfather's lineage down. But
so anyway, your name was Mastroyanis.
Yeah, Mastroyanis, yeah. And there's a lot of Mastroyanis in the capital of Nisiros, and then there's another clan in one of the towns up on the mountain on the volcano. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I always when I was seeing your name in the past, I was thinking like, how can it be? I'm very curious about names. I'm very curious about linguistics, not in the sense that I'm very expert in that, but how do they come to be? You know, how was the first male of that line, you know, named?
Yeah, well, it's got to go back quite a bit because there's Italians that are Mastroianni that are in America. I don't know where that came, you know, where it transferred. Although they had conquered Nisiros a couple times. Yeah. So I don't know if it came from there or what, but.
And keep in mind that many Southern Italians have Greek origins, to be honest. You know, Napoli and Palermo, and you know, if you go south to Sicily. So after that great lesson, so let's go to the to the thing of the hour. Before we go into more details or try to decipher more details, what do you believe? What do you know about ancient nutrition? Talking about Bronze Age, about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Mesopotamia, Persia. Do you have any clue? Do you ever research? What do you know? What do you believe?
I mean, I haven't focused too much on archaeological evidence and stuff like that. And so I put a lot more emphasis on, for example, the work of Weston Price and other nutritional anthropologists who studied living groups that had some ties to the past. And I think one of the interesting things, I mean, there's a couple interesting points that come out of that type of research. One is that even those societies were dynamic. And so if you look at any one of those groups, if there was someone who was able to spend a decade with them, you can even see like shifts in how those groups eat over time. Or if you're able to just study a little bit of, at the turn of the 20th century, pretty much anyone that wasn't kind of connected to Western society had kind of shallow knowledge of their own history that was passed by through oral tradition. For example, there was someone who spent 8 years with the Maasai, which are a cattle herding tribe in Kenya and Tanzania. And they basically, their knowledge of their history went back like 100 years. They didn't really have like extensive knowledge of their history that went back much farther than that. But if you look at like even among the Maasai, right, you can see these closely related groups where there are some that like kind of left off in the last couple thousand years and became agriculturalists and stuff like that. And you can see how their diets, even though they specialized in cattle herding as part of their identity, what they were actually eating quite often was a result of who were the surrounding tribes that they were trading with. So I think it's, if you're looking back in archaeology and you're trying to make some statement about what people were eating 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or further, you can make some generalizations, but you have to realize that to cast a whole, make a general statement about a whole age is got to have a lot of caveats. And among them is that whole age was probably subsectioned into like constantly evolving traditions through that time. But another important point that comes out of that research is that some of these groups might not have had tremendous knowledge of their history going back, but they all had tremendous knowledge of the principles of good nutrition and often went out of their way to eat specific things because they knew about nutritional deficiency diseases and they knew about the healing power of foods. And they had, through generations, collected bodies of wisdom about what to eat when and for what reason. And I think that's very interesting because a lot of people who want to eat like our ancestors think that if they just get rid of modern foods and just eat real food, that they will automatically eat what they need and eat a good diet. But that's not how our ancestors ate. Like, they didn't have any experience of junk food up until recently, but our ancestors didn't think that you could just eat whatever as long as it came from nature and you'd be fine. They had a very extensive knowledge of, I would call it nutrition. I mean, they didn't know about vitamins and minerals and stuff, but they understood deficiency diseases and the importance of eating certain foods at certain times to get certain results. But I think that, if you just try to eat like our great grandparents did, you'll probably do yourself a lot of favors because it's no guarantee of good nutrition, but it sort of takes out a lot of errors that you could make. And the same thing is true if you try to eat like cavemen. The further you go back, it gives you a certain amount of guarantee that you're not making certain errors that we would make with our industrial foods. But I think we really need to study modern nutrition science to put all that stuff in context, because our knowledge of what people were eating thousands of years ago is very limited. And it's very tempting to make generalizations that are too overbroad. And so if we also look at our body of nutrition science to understand what do we know about what foods do to you, then we can put a lot of context on trying to interpret what people were eating. And it'll help us read between the lines a lot, where we can see archaeological evidence that they ate X because we found it in a tooth or we found a bowl of it. But I think kind of putting that together in a story of what people were eating and how it impacted their bodies, I think is something where we want to integrate the science. Those are my general thoughts.
All right. Interesting thoughts. First of all, thank you for deciphering and at least having critical mind to not give a simple answer, because in this age, sometimes people try basically to oversimplify things. For example, eat carnivore, and our ancestors ate carnivore, and we should all eat carnivore. Or some people ate, vegetarian in the past, so why not all of us eat vegetarian again? But as you say, there are many things that change, and I haven't dived extensively into my ancient past and the Mediterranean area where I live, and Europe and Mediterranean area in general, North Africa, Mesopotamia, maybe Anatolia, Balkans, Greece, Italy, blah blah. But what I know, to be honest, Chris, is that for example, my grandparents, because in Greece also, just like the Maasai, I think it was the Maasai that you referred to. The Maasai.
I did mention them, yeah.
Yeah, the Maasai. So you said that Maasai had like 100 years or something of knowledge and not more than that. And in Greece, I think that's where traditions come in play. I think traditions are basically school. It's a schooling process. So you don't need to learn what your ancestors ate back in 500 BC or 1000 BC, but you can know what they ate just by observing your grandfathers and your grandparents and your parents. And then you can teach that same to your children and to your grandchildren, and they to their own grandchildren, and the line continues to teach each other. I think that's where traditions come in play. It's in my mind a form of schooling, and I say this because I'm a little bit worried about the whole. I'm not against science, but I see in myself that sometimes wisdom comes in weird ways and in more simpler ways, in the sense of there are some principles that you do not cross, some principles that my grandparents, so the grandfathers of my own parents, they always respected those principles. So just to give an example, and we are talking now early 20th century, late 19th century, rural Greece and poor Greece, but nevertheless. So they ate seasonally. It was always a principle that had to be respected. There was no other way, basically. The trade was just for the rich guys. So if you were rich in Greece, yeah, maybe a merchant class or a higher upper banker class, yeah, maybe you had bananas in winter in Greece. But if you were just a poor bastard from the Epirus Mountains from Greece, northern Greece, you didn't have bananas, believe me. You had your seasonal vegetables, wild grasses. I mean, when I go to my village up there in the mountains, my grandmother, she's 90, she still cooks the same way as her mother cooked and her grandmother cooked. So specific vegetables, wild grasses that people in the city now find horrific, find terrible. So I mean, bitter grasses, lots of bitter greens. Not every time of the year, but sometimes of the year, they grow their own stuff. And sometimes the weather changes, so we have apples up in the mountains. And I say all this because lots of people are focusing only on the science. And I don't, but again, I'm very respectful of the science when it's done correctly. And we both know, and you do more than me, know that presently the science is not done very correctly. But besides science, in my humble opinion, I think that we have to research the traditions and to balance them out. So balance the wisdoms of modern science, modern scientific capabilities, and ancient wisdom and traditions of the world that still remain but are not very public. And one last thing before I let you take the microphone, as we can say, is that, for example, bread, many people say against gluten many things, against barley, against oats. They are against these things because they have gluten, and gluten causes all these nasty diseases. But here they are, my grandfathers and my grandmothers, 95, and they eat bread since they were children. So how can you explain that, right? Do you have any answer? Do you have any ideas about gluten and all that
stuff? So first of all, a lot of the evidence that people would cite in favor of the paleo argument is the archaeological evidence that health dramatically declined at the transition to agriculture. And that is the case, but I think we have to caveat that in a few ways. So one thing is that when people were able to mass produce grains through agriculture, they didn't have any knowledge of how to eat a diet that was based on grains. And so they thrust themselves into a trial and error system that had a lot more error before they trialed enough times to gain some basic sense about how to make grains part of a diet. And so one of the mistakes that you would make is that you would have no idea that, imagine that you're in an environment where you just eat unlimited amounts of the animals that you're killing, and you're eating relatively nose to tail, and you didn't bother to eat anything else. You're pretty much getting all your nutrients in. And you might have reasons to diversify your diet, but you're not going to get, you could be really bad at eating carnivore. And as long as you eat nose to tail every time you kill an animal, you're probably going to be reasonably okay. Whereas if you invent agriculture and now you can make corn or wheat or whatever, and that becomes 95% of your diet, you're screwed. because that doesn't have a nutritional profile that can allow you to eat that as 95% of your diet and not have numerous severe nutritional deficiencies. If we didn't have any nutrition science, but we did have archaeology, I don't know why that would be the case, but if we ignored nutrition science and we just looked at archaeology and you just focused in on the transition, you would be like, oh, wheat is terrible for you. Look what happened when they started eating it. They got short, they got cavities, their bones suck. And then, same thing happened when these guys started eating corn. Over here, they did it with oats. And then you're like, nah, these grains, they're terrible for you. And so if you understand just like the basics of nutrition science and where nutrients occur in foods and which foods are more broad spectrum sources of nutrients and which are more narrow profiles of nutrients, you then understand which foods can be staples, which need to be diversified among each other, which really need to be paired with something else. Then you can look at that and you can be like, of course, they thought they could eat just corn and they screwed themselves. And then later they figured out, oh, we can make corn part of the diet. And then they recovered. And that recovery is also pretty clear in the archaeology. I mean, one really curious fact is that when you look at the arguments for paleo from archaeology, you consistently see that agricultural transitions are marked by losses of height. People become short. But there's a paradox. All extant and all surviving hunter-gatherer groups are all short compared to their modern Western counterparts. So if agriculture makes you short and being a hunter-gatherer makes you tall, according to the archaeology, why is it that being a hunter-gatherer alive in the 21st century makes you short and being an agriculturalist in modern society makes you tall? This obviously is less clear than grains make you short, right? The reason for the modern paradox here is unclear, but one friend of mine who is very knowledgeable about this has a hypothesis that I tend to agree with, which is that hunter-gatherers have largely been marginalized towards environments that are not necessarily as abundant as they would have had access to in the past. And there's probably also an effect of dairy making you taller in terms of the effect on growth. And so that might also be part of why Westerners are taller. But there's also just the fact that the loss of height was temporary in the archaeological record. And so I think that temporary loss of height that's then later recovered from very easily suggests that it's not the grains that made the loss of height happen. It's the improper use of grains that they later figured out how to use properly. So that's how I see the archaeology. And then on the other hand, what do we know from modern science? Well, we know some people have celiac disease. We know that there is a movement towards recognizing a broader condition of non-celiac gluten sensitivity that is more common. But we also know other things. So for example, if we just look at what causes an immunological reaction to food, we know that it can't possibly be the presence of food by itself, because the default of the intestinal immune system is to take everything that you eat, partially break it down, and then bring pieces of that partially digested food protein into specialized pockets of the immune system called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, or GALT, and there teach the immune system that this is food and you should tolerate it. So simply being exposed to something that could stimulate an immune response by default causes immune tolerance. The fact that the immune system can recognize a food protein does not lead to intolerance. It leads to tolerance. What causes intolerance? What causes intolerance is when any protein is accompanied by either pathogen-associated molecular patterns, or PAMPs, or damage-associated molecular patterns, or DAMPs. Really, PAMPs are a subset of DAMPs. So the point is, maybe your body recognizes something specific about pathogenic microbes But more probably, your body just recognizes when stuff's getting destroyed. And pathogenic microbes can destroy stuff. Toxins can destroy stuff, and like many different injuries can destroy stuff. I mean, you could eat glass and cut up your intestines. I've never seen this studied, but I would be surprised if eating shards of glass didn't cause you to develop food intolerances. But I mean, a much more common thing would be you have an intestinal infection that is causing damage to the tissues. Whenever you have damage to tissues, your immune system wants to learn what's causing the damage and then takes proteins that are nearby the damage and says, aha, this must be bad for me. And then trains itself to respond to that by attacking it or cleaning it up. And then there are also important biochemical things that are needed to create an environment of tolerance. And so it is possible that if you were deficient in those things, you would be trying to create tolerance, but you're creating intolerance because your biochemistry is just screwed up. And so the immune system's getting confused by, even though the environment should favor tolerance, it's not. And so among those, I would list vitamin A and arachidonic acid, which is a fatty acid, an omega-6 fatty acid that's most abundant in liver and egg yolks. And then I would list among harmful factors that people can easily modify NSAIDs, which interfere with the metabolism of the arachidonic acid that's in the liver and egg yolks. And then, of course, anything that actually causes damage, even if you have the right biochemistry, so an intestinal infection, for example, can create intolerances. So if you look at celiac disease, if you look at the genes that predispose someone to celiac disease, those genes are part of what allows the immune system to recognize the gluten protein and mount an immune response to it. But most people who have those genes don't have celiac. Right. So the gene is one or the other of a handful of genes seems to be necessary, because without the immune system recognizing that specific protein, you can't mount that specific type of immune response to it. But they're nowhere near sufficient. They're overwhelmingly insufficient to cause celiac disease. It's impossible that there's not more to celiac disease than that someone with a genetic predisposition to recognize the gluten protein eats it. That's not the cause of celiac disease. It's that person with the genetic predisposition ate it and had something else going on in their intestines, creating damage-associated molecular proteins or pathogen-associated molecular proteins, or had some kind of biochemical dysfunction that made the immune system mount intolerance when it was trying to make tolerance. And so if you look at the incidence of something like celiac or even non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is much more poorly defined, or anything else that you want to talk about in terms of immunological reactions to grains, then what we know from science suggests that there is, if we just look at like, why would we observe the current incidence of it? Well, I mean, the most protective foods like liver and egg yolks have been cleared off the table through the loss of traditions or through direct antagonism over their cholesterol content, and because there's more palatable things than liver and no one wants to eat it anymore and things like that. Widespread use of NSAIDs, many things you could invoke to explain why those things would be much more common now than they used to be. And that would explain why your great grandparents had one tradition and now maybe more people who get sick eating those things than they would have. But it's still the case that even today, it seems that many people can eat grains with no problem. So to sum that all up, I think that if you use grains poorly, divorced from any kind of wisdom by over consuming them and not balancing them with other things, you will screw your nutrition and they'll be bad for you for that reason. But if you use grains wisely, according to those traditions, and you don't have other stuff that is going to create an immune intolerance to them, then they can be part of a healthy diet, and they will be very likely to be part of a healthy diet.
Thank you, Chris. That was an excellent lecture. But I have to ask now, you gave me the pass to ask, you said liver and you said it twice. So on a positive note about liver, let me say a few things. So there is a tradition here in Easter, Orthodox Easter. So in my village up in the mountains, we gather around all the family members cousins, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, fathers, children all around playing. It's a very nice thing to do. It was. Now it's destroyed, of course, from the goblins that try to scare the people. But I'm not going to say the words. I'm trying. But back in the day, when it was a great tradition to gather around the table, we used to eat lots of sheep and goats. What most people forget, even in modern Greek society, is that we don't just eat at least in my villages, we don't just eat the meat of the animals, we ate everything. Like, Chris, literally what you say, nose to tail, exactly to that point. When I say everything, I mean like even the bones, like everything. Nothing was wasted. I mean, the eyes.
You ate all this on Pascha?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I was young,
they always served us lamb, but they never gave us eyeballs or livers or anything.
Oh man, yeah.
I guess we were missing the traditions.
yeah. That's
most
part
of
of
it.
it. Yeah. I mean, that's the fun of it. I mean, let me describe you the scene. So I'm like 5, 6 years old, and I'm going there. We're going there. It's beautiful weather, Greek weather, up in the mountains. The snow is melting, and everyone's cheering up. And we cook, and we don't cook any. It's my grandfather. He's outside of the house. Village. Imagine yourself a village, mountains, up in the mountains. Great viewpoint of the mountains in the nearby setting. And there is my grandfather. He takes a knife. He goes nearby. He speaks to the goat, slash its throat, killing the goat in front of the children, in front of everybody. And the goat dies. And of course, my grandfather is a little bit sad, and my grandmother and my mother cries probably. But we take the goat. The men go with my grandfather, the boys, my uncles, and they made the preparations, and then we cook it. And then the funny thing that I learned when I was young is that most of the brothers and the sisters, my mom, my uncles, my aunts, they were fighting to get the brains, to get the eyeballs, to get, literally, to get the liver, to get the heart. They were fighting for them. And when I was young, I found that weird. I mean, why do you fight for that meat? It's ridiculous. And my mom always reminded me, it still reminds me, telling me stories of how her brothers were stealing the hearts or the eyeballs and the brains. And I'm listening to these things, and I've learned to eat them. So I've learned the taste. And for example, I love liver. I mean, you cannot give me enough of it. I really love. I'm weird. I know. It's like liver. Yes. What?
I didn't grow up with it. So I don't like. I don't hate it, but I don't like liver at all. But I eat liver because I feel better when I eat it.
So I don't know. Now that's one thing. So what do you think about liver? What do you think about organs in general? We don't have a lot of time to talk about them, but what's your general opinion, and what do you think about people learning to like things when they are children? So how does that work in your opinion?
Obviously, eating nose to tail is more economically efficient when you are dealing with, a society that's not so affluent that it can mass produce like boneless, skinless chicken breast and throw the rest away. But more importantly, from a nutritional perspective, eating nose to tail is a form of diversification. So meat has a certain nutritional profile, eyeballs have a different nutritional profile, liver has a different one, et cetera, et cetera. And when you put all those organs and bones together, you are actually getting something very close to complete nutrition in a way that you're not if you just eat steak. And I think that regarding taste, just anecdotally, it seems like most people who like the taste of liver grew up eating liver, and most people who didn't grow up eating liver don't like the taste of liver. And so I think it's an acquired taste, and you have to teach kids to acquire it. But I think, there's brain wiring that goes on that makes you want to eat things that your brain recognizes as valuable. But a lot of that wiring, I think, takes place in development, and it's harder to change that wiring when you're 30 years old. It might be possible, but it's much easier to form that wiring the right way the first time around rather than to try to edit it decades after forming it wrong. And so I think that if and when I have kids, I'm certainly going to feed them organ meats and hopefully get them to like them, because I think you'll have a much easier time getting good nutrition in if you like eating organ meats. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Thank you. And one last thing before we go. So what's the best way, in your opinion and your research, to consume organ meats, liver, heart, everything?
I don't think there's any particular best way from a nutritional perspective apart to get enough of them. But I think my experience is that for most people, the liver that they'll eat is the liver that they should eat, because most people have a hard enough time just making habits around eating organs. And so I find that just picking a particular species that you like the taste and texture of the most. But some ways that are helpful, I think, for people who don't have a taste for it, I think that grinding together different organ meats like liver, heart, and kidney, for example, into ground meat and then cooking it in abundant taco seasoning is a great way to enjoy it. And I found this out by accident because I was at a Weston A. Price conference and they served tacos for lunch. And I found out afterwards that the tacos were 25% heart and liver. And I had no idea. So I actually, one of the things that I do is I buy White Oak Pastures paleo ground beef, which is, I think, 40% organ meats, 60% beef. And I think it's liver, heart, and kidney. I forget the percentages, but I just cook that in a pan with a lot of taco seasoning. And, you can go the whole way and make a taco out of it, but you can just also just, eat it. And I think stuff like this is super helpful, especially for people, for like modern people with kids who they just can't figure out how to get their kids to eat organ meats. And, I think that's one way to get them, because if you blend it in with beef to dilute it, the flavor down, and then you also season it with, I think taco seasoning just goes really good with it. So that's more of a hack than a scientific statement. But if you can get 4 to 8 ounces of liver a week, I think that's ideal. The kidney, I think you can eat more liberally of, but you probably won't. So, and then heart, I mean, you could just eat heart like steak. It's pretty similar to it, but heart's like very high in coenzyme Q10, but otherwise it doesn't stand out as particularly dense in any particular nutrient. So I view heart as a little closer to like regular meat, but most people are probably not going to venture further than that. But, eyeballs are a great source of vitamin A. Brains are very high in long chain fatty acids and stuff like that. Could be a substitute for fish. But yeah, that's what I have to say.
Amen. All right. That was a great suggestion. I didn't expect that. So thank you. I'll try that next week.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, Chris. So when can people find you? And before you go, of course, I'm going to ask you something in Greek, and I'm going to test if you can remember your Greek.
I'll probably fail, but
yes, failure is just a step to success. Huh? Stepping stone. Yeah. All right. So please let us know of your media.
Oh, chrismasterjohnphd.com is where you can find me. Everyone should sign up at chrismasterjohnphd.com/uncensored, since I'm imminently getting deplatformed from social media. And so if you sign up at chrismasterjohnphd.com/uncensored, you will be sure to stay in touch with me no matter who tries to break us apart.
So having said that, let's go to the Greek thing.
I'm nervous.
I know that you're nervous. I can feel it. I can feel the tension. So I'm trying to find what I can ask you so that I can see what can you ask them back. So, all right. So an easy question is, Χριστόφορε, πότε θα ξαναέρθεις στην Ελλάδα?
Say it one more time. 2018, I went, but what'd you say? Or did you say when will I?
Yes. So I said Χριστόφορε, which is you, Christopher.
No, I know that.
Yeah. Πότε
when.
θα ξαναέρθεις
yeah, okay, right.
στην Ελλάδα?
Yeah. Δεν ξέρω. hopefully next year. Hopefully this year.
And that in Greek is thanks, it was awesome. And hopefully is ελπίζοντας.
Yeah, all right.
Τον επόμενο χρόνο. Τον επόμενο.
Yeah.
The next. Τον. Χρόνο is of course the year.
No, but hopefully this year. Ελπίζω.
Αυτόν τον χρόνο.
Αυτό το χρόνο, yeah.
Yeah, man, you're just fine. I mean, Greece is a very hard language.
My Greek was pretty good when I went back in 2018 because I went on a mission. My family had no idea if I had relatives in Nisyros, so I went there myself, knowing no one, and I worked with a tutor in Athens to practice talking to strangers, trying to find long lost family. So my Greek was decent back then, but now I have it. I don't use it anymore, and so it's fallen into this non-English bucket with Spanish, and now like when I try to talk to someone in Spanish, I'm like grabbing for Greek words, and when I try to say something in Greek, I'm grabbing for Spanish words. It's terrible.
You said something funny in Spanish. When I was in Germany, man, I lived in Munich. You know Munich, Germany?
I haven't been there, but I know about it.
Yeah, it's southern Germany. It's a beautiful city, by the way. I mean, if you like tourism, definitely check that out. But when we went there with my family to live for 6 years, people thought we were Spaniards. So I guess your mental wiring is not by accident. Spanish and Greek, it's kind of like smooshy.
Well, it's just the two languages that I've studied a lot. But when I spent the week in Spain, and the people I was with were joking that I was a Mexican because they would talk to each other in Spanish, and I would know what they were saying, and they were like trying to hide it from me. And it's funny.
Mexican. Okay.
Well, because I'm from North America, right?
Yeah.
So visiting from.
yeah. Wow.
So they're joking that I really came from Mexico instead of the U.S. to visit.
Oh man, dude. I don't know. I have a feeling that you're fun to be around with. I mean, there are some people very adventurous and fun people. So if you come to Greece, I mean, please let me know so we can have some fun here and go around places. But there will be goblins here too. So don't think that you're going to don't think that you are going to go away and find the sire. It's going to be murder everywhere. So no worries. Yeah. Having said that, man, thanks for coming on, and
thanks for having
me. You soon, man. And I'll send you the interview and all that stuff in a month, maybe. And talk to you soon, then, man.
Great talking to you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you too, Chris. Have a nice night. Yeah,
you too.
All right, ciao, man.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.